is if you're comfortable with perspective and want to be a little bit more accurate, you could make a box and then put a bit of a C-curve on the front. And this would be a way to indicate for how the kind of the bottom portion of the pelvis pushes out more directly. Skeletal visualization of this would be that anything is fine, but they all basically mean the same thing and allow you to visually represent the same thing. This first one, I wanted to go through basic process drawing. This is something I don't think I can encourage enough for those of you that may struggle or have difficulty with the drawing. I'm just gonna go through the landmarks, shapes, and then connections. So I won't do too much in the way of kind of breaking down what I'm doing in every step. Instead, I'm just gonna go through the process now, which I hope you'll have at least a passing familiarity with. So here's my gesture. I'm working into the foreleg, chest, just the curve of that forearm that's not holding weight. I'm going to put in a ground plane just to get the perspective and placement of the back legs to feel consistent to the front. And I'm thinking, so I'm going to double check my distance. I always try to push the cats to have that longer lumbar, but I might have overdone it. I tend to do this on all my gestures. Even on people, make the legs a little long. So I'm gonna stop it there. This line indicates the anterior crest. And if we wanted to be real specific, we could say it's gonna be higher on that side. And there's that asymmetry of position. The pelvis is high on one side, and that's countered on the forearm. And then I always work to the weight bearing side. So here I see my knee, come back. This is the lower leg. And then this is the foot, and then we'll think about the high heel idea. I don't really think about that foot or ankle always high up off the ground. Here's a curve and rhythm for the tail. I just can't change it. And then for what looks like more of a stretched leg. So the reason, again, this is for the that ground plane that I made. If you want, if it helps, you can relate this back. Sometimes I get awkward positioning for my legs, and so it's a helpful reminder for me. And then I'm thinking of one line. Remember, it's the as is through the knee down to the foot, and I have a good idea of where that should end so that it feels like it's foreshortening and not unrelated to the rest. So that's a gesture. Don't have to go too much farther than that.
Hey guys, if you want to learn from Michael, he has a course on the Introduction to Figure Construction on Proko.com. Check out the link in the description for more info. Your guys' support really does help us make more content like this, so thanks. Thanks, and back to the video.
So now I'm going to look at landmarks. All right, so the landmarks that I'm going to use, at least for the setup here, was shapes and then connections before landmarks. So the connection here between the neck and the rib cage is always defined by those C and S curves. So this might be C. This I'm thinking of as an S. Now, what is that connecting to? Well, I want to put my rib cage, or indicate for my rib cage here. So if we think about where that spine is, which is always lower or inside of the contour or the profile, we would see the spine cervical to here. I'll try to be a little bit more specific with some of the bones so you can see maybe how the construction will result on top of them. Thoracic is this. And then we have this kind of big arching lumbar, which is taking us into the pelvis. So first, rib cage, we said we'll have that spinuous process, just like a horse, except it's not as high. And that goes down in kind of a wave pattern. So it's high near the shoulder, it's lower towards the center and lumbar, and then it gets slightly raised again nearer to the pelvis. So that's the spine. It's like ours has something similar. And then rib cage, here's thinking the front. That means that this line or little shape I'm making there is the sternum, goes down, and then starts to come back up. So we could think of the rib cage in cat as more of a teardrop kind of shape. And I'm thinking of this all turning under, right, so that we get the sense of it as a volume. So that's how I'm thinking of the head connecting through the neck into the rib cage. The pelvis, any number of ways is acceptable or fine to draw the pelvis. It could be Just got to put up a few variations here. The sphere, if you're comfortable with this, and then starting to tilt it and then move it. It could be small, thin box if you want to do something that's more specific to the pelvis. So let's just start with that. Another alternative that I think looks really nice is if you're comfortable with perspective and want to be a little bit more accurate, you could make a box and then put a bit of a C-curve on the front. And this would be a way to indicate for how the kind of the bottom portion of the pelvis pushes out. So it'd be like an organic solution to thinking about the more rigid architecture and skeletal structure of the pelvis, which would look more, if we did a basic box again, more directly skeletal visualization of this would be that. These are the crests of the pelvis. So it's the anterior superior crest. Probably heard about that in a human anatomy class. And then the ischium pulls back like that. The leg sits right in there. And you have kind of the opening and the movement down towards the ischium. So depending on your level, anything is fine, right? But they all basically mean the same thing and allow you to visually represent the same thing. So let's just work with that one since I have it there, and then we could maybe gradually build over it to that. Right in here is where I can kind of make out that as is. So I'm gonna visually think about that there. That's what I'm aiming to get with this landmark stage. But last thing I need to do is connect. So you're gonna put a S-curve to show how this, which we now know is the abdomen and the oblique, is stretching, right? So now I'm all done with my landmark stage. Let's just put a few landmarks in the head so that we can get a sense for how the basic structure of this skull is gonna sit. So let's do a center line. And I think first, since I know there was some confusion over the cat head, why don't we draw a skull first, and then over that I can construct out how I would normally think through the simplified planes. So we'd have the basic ridge here of the skull. On the other side, I'd be thinking of the brow line or the eye line here. That's the ridge of the brow. Here's the little corner or that open area that I know I've talked about of the eye socket. In other words, the incomplete socket or temple, missing temple. Here it is on the other side. And then if you kind of look at the eye socket, it'll just flow back into the cheek structure. So you can make a C-curve here for the idea of that cheek. Here's the kind of the whole of the cranial mass or brain case, and then down into the nasal area and mouth. So this would be where I'd later represent that kind of ramping plane. And from there we would be into the nasal structure. So here's the housing, or in the figure, human skull, this is called the saddle, the nasal saddle. So I'm thinking of this as kind of under where the placement of the nose would be. For cats, to make it a little bit shorter, kind of like a little tiny piece of toast. From there, we could think from a rhythm, just drawing a rhythm down from the corner of the eye. That gives me my basic structure for that top plane. If you do one slightly lower than that, that would be where the canine sits. And that's a fun way to try to work into separation of front of the mouth versus the side of the mouth, is to find a canine. So that would be where the kind of the large tooth is in the front end of the top of the mouth with the teeth. And then we have the back or the lower jaw. So a really simple skull setup, just so that we could maybe take a look later at how the idea of head construction will simplify this. That's all I need. Now let's set up some of the bony landmarks in the body. Just to be really clear, scapula, the shoulder or the shoulder blade. And because there's so much weight on it in this, peeking or pushing up above the contour of the back. And it could be a triangle shape or a triangle plus a curve, like we talked about it in class, as far as how it represents a form language that resonates with the larger structure of the cat. And then on top, we could make what's called the spine of the scapula, which is just going to be like this little notch or plane that sticks out in the middle and helps divide muscles top to bottom for how they work or move the arm. Under that is where the head of the humerus would begin. So that's that ball and socket joint. And that would be in this area here. So scapula down, ball and socket back to the angle of the humerus. And this is that arrow shape that I talked about. So humerus, we could think of as a longer S-curve. And then at the bottom, it becomes more so of a hinge. So ball and socket to hinge. Here's my hinge structure idea. And I'm just dropping this slightly below the rib cage. On the other side, we might have a harder time seeing this. So it looks like if I were to draw through scapula, hinge joint would be somewhere back here. So this one, I'm trying to visualize the idea of it having moved forward, and then this one conversely somewhat back. The forearm, before we move into the structure of the pelvis and the legs, I would put 2 bones here. Fitting into that hinge joint is the ulna, so larger at the top because it's creating that hinge structure. And then the radius sitting in front, crossing over the inside. And this is that idea for pronation that cats, monkeys, us, and a few other animals will have. And then for the basic structure of the hand, one thing to remember is the asymmetry of the wrist, which you can kind of see here, high to low. So here we could fit in the carpal idea, maybe just like a rounded shape, and then down to the bones of the palm. So here's the palm, and then once we're here, we'll start to see the fingers come out, down, and then up or forward, depending on what the claw is doing. And this is that digit grade stance that I've been trying to emphasize for cats, so that nobody stands on the flats of their feet. And then here for this one, let's just make a gestural indication of this hand. Wrist is here, and then that hand's moving back. So there's the front of the cat, and now let's start to work our way into the pelvis. I'm going to clean up this ribcage design a little bit just to thin it. And I think this is all still landmark stage. So gesture, tilts, shapes, connections, landmarks, and now let's put in some descriptive landmarks for the pelvis. So I'm starting with this shape, and what I'm doing on top of it is just saying, okay, well, if that's my shape, I see a point here, or a light and dark shift. And then on the other side, I see something that's peeking up behind the loins. So that's that muscle group we talked about that's right in here. That gives me my landmark points to set up a box. So actually I'm going to move this one out some, overshot it. Let's say it's there and here, but I don't want this to be too wide, right? A wide pelvis would be a stable animal, like a horse. Once I have this, then what I can do is I'm going to use that to get here, right? So these 2 points are these 2 points. So from that, all I have to do is drop a height, a width, and a depth. Once you have those 3, all you have to do is just go on autopilot and copy paste the rest. And if you wanted, you could get super fancy with that little half cylinder, right? But that would be one way you could help think about where muscles are going. If a representation of a bone helps you to think about where you put the abs, for example, right? The abs would go right into the top of that. Okay, now think 2/3 of the way down, carve out a little area for cavity, and that's where the femur is going to go. So designing a femur, head of the femur, great trochanter, femur. And I want to double check here my distance and my heights. So usually we'll see the knee a little bit lower than the ankle. So that's okay. Same setup in terms of the design of the leg, hinge joint, just like ours. Patella, tibia, fibula, and then hinge joint for the ankle, calcaneus, tarsus, and then the toes would be the same. So that's done. This side, I would be seeing, because the knee would be behind, I would be seeing there the tibia, hinge, and then foot.